I'm extremely excited to be here today. I am in the company of greatness here. I'm so excited for the gorgeous melanin faces that I have here joining me today. And yeah, what's happening is as part of Hispanic Heritage Month, BENlabs is celebrating Afro-Latinos by having a discussion about identity, about portrayal, about representation, and a few more other things, right? So we have an amazing panel of people. I am going to introduce you to them briefly. But before I do, I just want to give you briefly for 30 seconds some brief facts about Afro-Latinos. In the US, depending on what survey you do your research on, and we try to do research here, either 12% of all Latinos and as much as 25% of Latinos consider themselves Afro-Latinos. That, however, has doubled in the last 10 years. So whatever it was before, whatever survey you look at 10 years ago, it was as low as 2%, but that has doubled or tripled since 2000. Afro-Latinos have influenced the culture of all of Latin America with music like salsa, samba, cumbia, food, religion. All of those things are deeply intertwined in our culture, and it comes from our African heritage. Famous Afro-Latinos include Celia Cruz, Ruben Blades, Pelé, Joyce Aldana, Lala Anthony. You could add your own names, including the people here, right? And despite the contributions, Afro-Latinos are barely represented in media, both in Latin America and in the US. So today I'm going to start this chat by having some of our amazing panelists introduce themselves and also answer the question, how do you define Afro-Latino? So, Kama, maybe we start with you. Maybe tell us a little bit more about you and what's your definition of Afro-Latino?
Um, Hi. I'm Calma Calmona. I'm a singer artist from Puerto Rico. I was raised as a military brat, so I was raised in different parts around the States, Puerto Rico, and Germany. How do I define Afro-Latinidad? It's very simple. It's African descendant. But within that, there's a broad spectrum of colors and perspectives and journeys, and they all interconnect. And I'm still in that journey of getting to know everything that Afro-Latinidad means.
Awesome. Thank you, Kalma. Oscar.
What's going on, Alex? Hey, everybody. So my name is Oscar Martinez. As you can see from this little thing that has my name there, you guys can see it. If not, it's Oscar Martinez. I am traditionally known as a creative marketer. I say traditionally because that's just the spiel that I go with all the time. So that's like my part-time gig is being a creative marketer. What does that actually mean? I don't have the tangible skills of a creative, but I am a strategist. I have an eye. I think very creatively. I am a connector. I bring things together from ideas to people. You kind of name it, right? Worked with a lot of amazing brands over the last 13, 14 years. Very big brands on the tech side as well as on the hospitality side. And currently right now, my full-time thing is being a podcast host. So me and two of my very close homies who are also Afro-Latino, host a podcast by the name of the Smartest Guys in the Room podcast. Please feel free to check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And we really dive deep into getting to know the journey behind creators and entrepreneurs who actually happen to be Afro-Latino. So this is actually a very interesting conversation to be had. Now, what is my definition of what Afro-Latinidad is? That's an awesome one because it is a definition I've been trying to figure out for 37 years. That's right. I'm 37, guys. So 37 years been trying to really figure it out, but I really thought it was interesting, Alex, how you just mentioned the fact that only a very small percentage, 12% of Latinos identify as Afro-Latino. Now, the reason, and this is just my gut telling me this, but prior to 2000, I don't remember ever hearing too many people ever even say Afro-Latino. That term is relatively new. So I feel like a lot of Latinos are starting to to realize like, wow, this is actually me. I do come from African, African background or African descent. But also like, it's really focused on like a lot of the Latinos in the Caribbean, right? Because we are the ones that like we were the first ones hit, and we look the most like our descendants and our ancestors and our brothers on the other side of the ocean, brothers and sisters on the other side of the ocean. But yeah, to your point, man, I think Afro-Latinidad is a beautiful mix of cultures, of traditions, ideas, of melanin, of women, of men, children. It's a beautiful, beautiful, just amalgamation of things, a tapestry, if you will. But we could talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, I just pulled out that tapestry word. Haven't used that in a while. But I'll pass it over back to you, Alex, because I'm sure we'll talk
Yeah.
more after this.
Reina, why don't you give us your definition? Thank you, Oscar. And tell us
Yes.
more
Hi,
about yourself
everyone. My
also.
name is Reina. Yes. My name is Reina Noriega. I'm a visual artist and an author. My work as an artist centers around positive representations of women of color filled with joy and vibrancy. And for me, Afro-Latinidad, like everyone is saying, it's the concept and our concept of it is changing. For me, even I think my perspective is a little different being raised in the United States and kind of like seeing it from a different perspective. I have grown to even understand it within my culture. So having a Bahamian mother and a Cuban father, I always thought that my blackness came from. And as a kid, I'm looking at my black Afro abuelo, not realizing that, you know, he's a black man just because of the dialogue that's happening and kind of like the erasure of it. But it's very important because I think that identity, it's different for everyone and there's different nuances, but it all comes with such heavy history, such different culture and just habits and just these little nuances that, you know, to erase the part, you kind of like dilute the whole. So I think it's very important to have these conversations and for us to all collectively come to a sense of understanding of our identities.
Amazing. Thank you, Reina. Pavel.
Hey, what's up, y'all? So Pavel here. I'm a tech founder for an AI-powered journaling app that's launching pretty soon under the company Plural, and I also have this podcast called Quien which, ironically, unbeknownst to me, that all these dope people would be on the podcast. Reina has been on it. That's the most recent episode. Alex has been on it. Oscar, I was going to record with him today, and Calma, you already know I gotta get you on now, but. The mission of the show is to redefine professionalism. So we have conversations around the conflict that many of us experience between professionalism and authenticity. And yeah, I mean, I love Kalma's definition when she said of African descent. And when thinking about being Afro-Latino, we'll talk about the identity and like when did you know you were black, but I always refer to Cardi B. She was in this interview talking about, you know, what, like, how did you know you were Afro-Latina? And she was like, well, clearly I wasn't made from two white people fucking. And I really like that definition.
Best definition so far. Thank you, Pavel. Great. I should probably introduce myself. My name is Alex Montes. I'm the head of marketing here at BENlabs. And my definition of Afro-Latino, and probably this is the only question I will answer because this is about you guys, is that Afro is my race, Latino is my culture. So I am a Black person who happens to speak Spanish, who happens to like certain music, who happens to have a certain religion. And that comes from, you know, a lot of times that comes from elsewhere. But my race, in a lot of aspects, cannot be denied. So that's the way I define it. That's just via introduction. So with that being said, and maybe we can do a round robin, and let's keep it rated G because it's a corporate thing. A few things. Now that we have a definition of Afro-Latino, Pavel, maybe you were hinting at this. When do you begin identifying yourself as Afro-Latinos? Was this something you did forever, or is this something that's evolving, kind of, you know, like in Kalma's kind of example from earlier, and how has that affected your experience as your own identity evolved? Has that changed anything about you? So would love to hear that, Pavel.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, even the term, even like these things like race and ethnicity, like never in my life has someone asked me like, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm Latino. I've never said I'm Latino ever. That's only used for like the census or something corporate related. Like I think within our communities there's a heavy emphasis on this like nationalistic pride, like the origin of where our families are born, right? My family being from the Dominican Republic, like that's where their pride centers around. So I grew up saying I was Dominican, but at some point I don't remember when, maybe it was in college, like starting to do a little research on like the African diaspora, the connection to Dominican Republic, where I started to say I was black, but then you would hear people be like, yo, you just trying to be black, like, yo, you're Dominican, right? And like there was almost this like correction, and like there's how I identify and there's how people see me, and then there's people telling me I should do a certain thing. So honestly, till this day I still feel uncomfortable using the term Afro-Latino, Afro-Dominican, like any of those things. I still feel uncomfortable because I still feel in the back of my head people telling me that I'm not. Even like in corporate with like employee resource groups, like I would go to the black employee resource group and I would go to the Latinx employee resource group. But I would have white coworkers be like, oh, must be nice to go to both of them, have time for both of them, right? And I'm like, wasn't my choice, y'all. Wasn't my choice. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? So again, till this day, I still feel uncomfortable.
Thank you. That song, it must be nice. Uh, just came on. All right, let me go the other way around. Reina, why don't you answer that same question?
Yeah, so even when Afro-Latina wasn't a thing, I used to always opt to consider myself Black Hispanic. And so this is like the younger years in like, school and like whatever, when you have to answer those questions. And I always got stuck because it would always say, race, Black, white, and they both say not of Hispanic descent. And I would always be like, but what do I do? What do I do? Like, it always felt like, I had to just choose the one that made more sense. And then I think I had a different experience when it comes to people saying what I am or what I am not. I don't think that ever kind of bothered me. I know that I experienced a lot of like not being Latino enough or like not fitting what the norm was. But I think I always kind of saw my privilege in being able to benefit from the beautiful sides of all of my cultures, more so than like the lack of representation. And then I think I chose to just manifest that and create that for myself.
Thank you, Reina. That was great. Oscar.
I'm going to be honest with you. Both Raina and Pavel's responses were so good that I just forgot the question. So Alex, if you don't mind repeating it.
Yeah, I'm happy to repeat it all the time. When did you begin identifying as Afro-Latino? If you always identified as one, it's great. And then how has that affected your identity?
Yeah. When did I start identifying as Afro-Latino? I would say probably a couple years ago when I first heard the term. And I was like, that's it. That's what I am. That makes sense. But when did I start feeling that? I've always felt that way, right? So I think this is the elephant in the room, right? For all who are Dominican and all who grew up around Dominicans, right? We have this stigma or this thing or whatever you want to call it that a lot of Dominicans don't identify as being Black or being of African descent. I grew up with that all around me, hearing that in Washington Heights and here uptown New York. And but I always found it a little bit strange because at home, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, they're all very, very light skinned. Like if you saw them in the street, you would think that they were two like small little Jewish ladies, right? And then there's me, right? So I am this like little brown chubby kid running around the heights. And I knew, like, I was like, this isn't like, I know I don't necessarily feel like I'm super Latino. And Reina, thank you so much for saying that, because that's something that I think as Latinos, a lot of us are afraid of admitting that, like, we don't feel Latino enough, you know? So I went through major part of my life just not feeling very Latino, not really identifying with that part of me. And I'm 100% Dominican, and I grew up in the Heights. So that's weird, right? But then I went to college, very similar to Pabel, where I started doing a lot more research on what it is to be Dominican, what it is to be Latino. And that's where, like, it really just opened up everything for me, right? And I started getting a lot more comfortable with saying, like, okay, I do identify here as a Latino, but I also still identify as kind of as an African American, you know? But then you've got your friends who are African American that might not look at you like that. But then you've got your Latino friends who are like, bro, come on, what are you doing? We going out to dance bachata and salsa. And I'm like, nah, I can't do that, bro. And I'm not trying to do that, you know? And also it was just kind of like the upbringing where we kind of grew up here in New York. It's a very different place, right? Whereas if you talk to someone who is of Hispanic descent out in LA, they're going to give you a completely different answer because their experience, you know, growing up was very, very different. It might not have been as mixed as it was here in New York, you know? So that was a very long-winded answer to say, I identified as Afro-Latino probably a few years ago when I heard the term for the first time, but I've always felt it in mi corazón.
Thank you. Thank you. Kama, bring us home. Let me know if you need the question again.
I can relate to everybody, to be honest. I've felt very uncomfortable as well with the term Afro-Latina. I never used it. I just I started singing, and the internet started putting me in groups of Afro-Latinas. And that just, like, it was a reality check for me. It was like, oh, you know, it triggered a lot of things in my youth as a little girl, you know, like I never had like pelo lacio, or my curls weren't all the same. I have like 4 different types of curls, and I don't know how many different types of textures. That's why I have dreadlocks, because I can wear my hair down. And always just a lot of things I didn't get as a kid because I didn't have that mentality. A lot of things just started coming up. So to be honest, it's been a journey, and I'm trying to learn more about myself and learn more about everybody else. I feel like it's part of evolution, like human evolution, period. You know, I feel like I said earlier, it's a broad spectrum of stories, perspectives, journeys. My journey is not the same as nobody here in this panel, but that's beautiful, no? And to be able to have, I get really nervous in these spaces because I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. You know, I don't want to say something politically incorrect, and I'm trying to let go of that and to find safe spaces to learn more and have conversations like this.
Listen, if you talk to my friend Pavel here, he will tell you there's no definition of authenticity or all of that. So whatever you want to say goes here.
This is Planet Fitness. This is judgment-free zone.
Exactly. It's judgment-free zone. In fact, I was hoping somebody would go like, I'm not Afro-Latino. I mean, Nash just got invited to this panel. Or more interesting, but what we can see is that I mean, I wish there was a panel of African Americans here, and then I would ask them, when did you realize you were African Americans? And maybe we can compare the answers, because the thing with this Venn diagram between Latinos and Afro, and you know, and African and all of that, and or an African heritage, is that for a lot of us, for many of us, it wasn't immediately recognized. And I feel like that's a very different experience than other people that from the get-go may or may not know. So I mean, obviously we cannot talk for others and all of that, but I think this is an interesting characteristic that a lot of people say was like, well, maybe when the term was invented 10 years ago, that's when and you didn't even have a term before that. So that's why identity shifts, right, as it happens. But with that said, we have Ivan here. Ivan, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about you. And maybe you can tell us when did you learn, or maybe you never did. When did you decide to identify yourself as Afro-Latino?
Alex, first of all, thanks for the invite. Privileged to be on this panel with so many bright stars representing our city. To be honest with you, you kind of just nailed it for me. You really encapsulated. I was scratching my head when I first heard the term a few years ago. I didn't really, as far as I can remember, I've always been Afro-Latino by definition of what has come to surface as the definition of Afro-Latino in these past couple of years. They say you're a product of your environment. Well, my environment was Afro and my environment was Latino. I grew up eating mangú and listening to Jay-Z, right? Dancing to bachata and like having fried chicken, soul food, right? My friends, my community in Brooklyn, New York at the time in the 80s and 90s, I am and continue to be a product of my environment. And it's just, I never really labeled it, to be honest with you, Alex. I never labeled it. I embraced it. And, you walk with a soundtrack in your head, and that's just because of the upbringing in your house and in the building and then on the block. And so really wear my stripes proudly. If you want to call it Afro-Latino, great. And maybe we could help unpack that here a little bit, because as the generations come behind us, they may have another word or letter to add or remove. At the end of the day, they will be products of their environment as well. And it's okay for them to rock the Afro-Latino label, whatever they want to call it. Kind of rammed all place there, but
you came in strong, man.
We're a big old sazon, we're a big old salsa here. That's
exactly.
What we do.
Exactly. Thank you, Ivan. That's a very strong introduction. All right. All right. Following up on this, how do language and culture intersect with your experience as an Afro-Latino? Has there been a time where you felt pressure to lean more towards one aspect of your identity than the other? I think that was already expressed, right? But this juxtaposition of language is a thing for us. And then having two identities. Oscar, how do you feel about that? Have a feeling you have?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when you bring language into the mix, right? That's where I'm going back to what Reina was mentioned. Not feeling Latino enough. And like I was talking to Calma earlier, and I was saying, like, look, Spanish was my first language. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, but you put me around a bunch of other Dominicans, and I'm the gringo. You know what I'm saying? So like, and it's very like they'll call you out, and I think like I've got some like childhood trauma of hearing, being called the gringo in DR because of the way that I speak Spanish. But it's like I've been caught in between these two worlds my entire life, right? And Spanglish has always been like that happy medium where I can like talk English and just drop a Spanish word in there, but in a very like organic way, because that's just how I speak. Like when I would talk to my mother or my aunt or my grandmother, I'm interchanging. I'm going back and forth between English and Spanish because they were raised here. They were raised in New York. They came here when they were 13 years old. So, and they work for the city and all that other stuff. They use English on a daily, for work. So, and then obviously, like I'm using English with my friends when I'm at school, when I'm, but there is that sense of like home when you start to speak Spanish, but then it breaks up. You know, the English kind of seeps its way in there. But yeah, I think to kind of answer your question, my thought in regards to language is really feeling like I've been caught between these two worlds of like, when can I speak this? Am I speaking it proper enough to speak it? Should I just stay quiet and listen? Or, you know, am I in a space where I feel a little bit more comfortable and I'm able to kind of like just truly be myself, you know? I think a lot of times we just don't want to be like judged by people, and so we think too much about it. But those of us who are a little bit more progressive, we don't care what people think, right? But it takes time for you to get to that point in your life, you know, because until then, when you're in college, you're in high school, you care very much about what other people think, especially, you know, when you're like trying to like showcase who you are, like, you know. But yeah.
Thank you, Pavel. I think you have some thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. I think kind of coming off of what Oscar said, all right, so like in my corporate experience, it's interesting because like again, I would go to employee resource group meetings and functions and parties and get-togethers with like the Black group, and I would also go to the the Latino group. And honestly, more times than not, I would feel way more comfortable with the Black employee resource group, because I feel like with the Latino employee resource group, it was almost like a competition of like, how Latino are you? And I'm just like, first of all, there's certain foods I don't even eat. The jargon, the slang, there's just a lot of things that I felt like it was a competition, where I didn't feel like that in the Black employee resource groups. And it's weird too, because it's you're being judged by your own people that you would think would accept you, you know what I mean? So I think it's almost a little bit even more disappointing. But I think we fail to realize that like all of these things aren't by accident. Like there's always been that. And I try to think back to like even my family, where they came up and they grew up in they were around in the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo, where there was like an ethnic cleansing of thousands of Haitians, right? So he would literally go around town to town, and right, so you think about skin color, hair texture. But the thing that people forget as well is that there were mad Dominicans that were killed as well because of this like test that he would do. He would force people to say words where you had to roll your R's. So like carro. If you didn't know how to do that, done, right? So even like Dominican Spanish, way different than all these other things, right? So like even if I speak fluent in my like Dominican way, I'm being judged for that, right? So again, it's like passed down generationally based on like certain examples. So yeah, oftentimes I feel way more comfortable in rooms full of Black people compared to rooms full of Latino, Latinx people.
Wow. Thank you, Pavel. Reina.
Can you reiterate the question so I make sure I'm on topic?
Yeah. No, I gotta look that up again. But basically, do you feel like are there any times that you felt pressure to lean more towards one aspect of your identity versus the other? Especially as it relates to language and culture and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like everyone has said, it's because of the judgment. And sometimes it's because of your own internal insecurity that you even care, because I don't think as I've gotten older that it has gotten less. I think that I just have a better understanding of myself and where I came from and pride in that. So I'm able to tune out the noise a little bit better. Because in middle school, my 6th grade year, I went to a school that was predominantly Hispanic and Latino, but not very many people looked like me. And so I was always kind of singled out as like, well, say something right now, like, and being put on the spot and kind of like having to pass a test. And it always made me get into this state where I was performing, where I was trying to buy folders and t-shirts with Cuban flags on it just to like, I guess, mask, or just to like fit in. That became exhausting as I got older, and the pressure that I put on myself. Like in private, in writing, my Spanish is on point. But if you put me in front of someone that I feel is going to judge me, I close like a clam. Like I cannot say anything because of that fear of messing up and being judged. You know, I learned French in school with no problem because I didn't have that thought in the back of my mind of like this level that I have to reach. You know, I was just able to just kind of appreciate and learn and enjoy. So I think it is kind of like restricting access and kind of like preserving this optical illusion that, you know, whoever, wherever decided that we would have to fit into. Because even when we think of the terms Afro-Latino or African American or being a woman, this, you know, I deal with being an Afro-Latina artist, a woman artist, a this and that. You would hope that one day the standard is just that you're good and just that you're enough. And there is a lot of value and pride in my identities because that is what shapes my art and that's what shapes my voice and who I am. But there's also this level of like people always needing you to fit in a box so that they know what to do with you. That can also be like uncomfortable, and maybe, as you guys have said, also like we don't know what the future will look like for the next generations. Like that may be a hurdle we have to go through to get to a point where we are human first and also able to value like all of our identities without it being like, you know, you're not Afro enough, you're not this enough, you're not that enough.
Thank you. Kalma, any thoughts about this? This is getting good.
Yes, actually a lot. I've experienced this as a child, going to a lot of different schools. As an Army brat, you know, I've lived in trailer parks in Texas and Germany, public schools in PR. So yeah, I picked up both languages, but as I was talking to Oscar earlier, we were talking about that in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, there's a lot of broken down Spanish. So it's also not good enough for Latin America sometimes. And so I think I've been through all those stages, and like Reina, I can relate in the sense that it doesn't really matter anymore for me. When I started singing, because I have all these backgrounds, everything is like Ivan said, a product of your environment. So I was like, okay, well, I have a lot of environments, then what am I, you know? So I had to really, it's been a journey to find myself, you know? And when I started singing, for example, people were saying, what do you sing? What's your genre? And I was like, I sing soul and I mix it whatever I feel like mixing it. And the Anglo market understood that. The Latin market didn't understand that. So there's a lot of contradictions. First time I went to Spain, and I was in high school in Germany, and I'm kind of just putting little examples out there. I was excited because I speak Spanish, so I was going to Spain, and I was like, oh my god, I can, because I didn't speak German, and I felt like they treated me very rudely, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it until I bumped into a friend from New York, and they said that, oh, it's because you look mulata, you look mixed, and I was like, oh. I didn't, that wasn't my mentality. Like I wasn't thinking that way. And, so at the end of the day, I sing in Spanish and English and whatever I want, because at the end of the day, Spanish was also imposed on us. So, yeah. So you kind of find yourself and you do whatever you want, I guess.
It's interesting. I've had similar experiences in Spain. I never felt more Latino versus Spain, right, as when you're there. Ivan, maybe you can answer the question. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more, like, because I think you have a different perspective. Do you feel like you had to lean into one of your identities a little bit more than the other, or has there been any kind of struggle for you or not?
Well, first of all, I gotta go check out Calma's music.
Yes.
I gotta go top that right now. Here's a plug, Calma. Go check out Calma's music.
Thank you.
That sounds amazing. Spanish and English. I can't wait to check that out. Yeah, I mean, growing up in corporate America, I now work for a nonprofit organization. But growing up and trying to go, rise the ranks of corporate America, yeah, there's different environments there too. And there was diversity in those environments. I grew up in the music business, so I went from the studio with an artist like the Beatnuts. Perfect example. Beatnuts. These guys are from Corona. They're Colombian, Dominican, doing hip hop, which is really an African American innovation, right? Perfect example. So I'm hanging out in the studio with the Beatnuts, trying to get to deliver this album, but then I have to go into the office and I have to build a plan and I have to talk P&L with the finance team and publicity and marketing and down the line and present to the president. That's a different lexicon. That's a different language, right? So I was constantly oscillating based on what the audience was that was in front of me. And Calma said it best. It's a journey. I didn't have the confidence then that I do today. I realized I gotta, there's more power in the ability to toggle and adapt. We're chameleons. We're survivors. We have that camouflage skin.
So, yeah. So, Ivan, in your case, in professional settings, have you felt that your identity has been an asset, a challenge, or both?
Both. An asset because they didn't see me coming. And yet a challenge because sometimes I don't get the chance to be even in the room.
Can you go deeper about that, about not being in the room?
He's whatever the judgment might be, that I don't get the chance to really flex my strategic chops because there's assumptions that, I don't have that skill set. And so I had to kind of really navigate that and build a perception over time and find champions and supporters that would open up that door for me and allow me to build that perception with peers and with leaders to get to a point where I'm then invited by default because, Ivan adds value to this conversation. Professional Ivan is definitely strategic.
I love it.
Rowdy Ivan from Brooklyn, I don't know about that knucklehead, but the professional Ivan, man, he's pretty strategic.
I love it. Thank you. Oscar, do you feel like Afro-Latinos are accurately portrayed in media? Or are they portrayed at all, maybe? What are your thoughts there?
No. The answer is no. But I do want to, before I kind of get into that, I do want to just piggyback off of two things that Ivan just said. One, Ivan, the rowdy Ivan is just as strategic as the professional Ivan. You guys are one and the same. So I'd actually like to hear your thoughts from the rowdy. I want to hear your strategic thoughts from the rowdy Ivan more than the professional one. So that was one. The other thing is you touched on such an important and timely topic, which is hip hop, right? Like I would be remiss to even mention, like, we are in hip hop 50th anniversary of hip hop, for us to not talk about like the influence of Afro-Latinos or just Latinos in general in hip hop. Like it's not, and look, it's when you think about hip hop, as you kind of mentioned, Ivan, it's like it's an African American thing. But when you went to Sedgwick in the 70s, when that party was being thrown, there was just as many Latinos, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans that were at that party where hip hop was birthed, as there was black people, as there was white people that were kind of mixed in that had, you know, that came up to the Bronx. But you know, there was just as many of us there. And not only that, like even when you think about breakdancing culture, like that was us, baby. You know what I'm saying? That was us wearing those tracksuits and getting down and showing off our skills and all of that. And even some of the forefathers of hip hop, a lot of them are actually undercover Latinos, Panamanians. You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of wild. I mean, Fabulous is not an undercover Latino, nor is he a forefather, but Dominican. He's Dominican. You know what I'm saying? He's Dominican and Haitian. And like I remember when Fab first came out, that was what gravitated me towards Fabulous, was the fact that he was half Dominican and half Haitian. Because I was already listening to Pun, I was already listening to Fat Joe, and I thought the world of them. Because I was like, yo, finally, somebody that's like me, that's Latino, that is using their creativity in an art form that isn't uberly Latino. You know what I'm saying? Like, so when Fab came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was like, yo, this is me. This is me, and these are all my homies. This is and he's speaking in a way that like is relevant to me, makes sense. The type of music I listen to, the type of stuff that I care about, a culture that I was born into, you know. So like all I wanted to say, just so I went on that quick little tangent, is that there would be no hip hop without Latinos or Afro-Latinos. So like I like to like make sure that people are aware of my thoughts on that one. So Alex, going back to your question, we could skip me now because I took up a bunch of time.
We're gonna skip you. But if you guys want to go off script, let's do that. You guys can just react to each other. Happy to do that, right? Kalman, Reina, you guys are more like artists, right? So and I think you alluded to it. Does your identity as Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinas, or evolving identity in this case, has help or not in your case? Maybe Kalma, you go first.
Absolutely. As an artist, I try to be as authentic as I can. No negotiation in that part. So I think with my body of work, I think it shows my exploration. It shows how proud I am of my heritage, and I keep, like I said in the beginning, it was a little uncomfortable for me because I never want to take up a space of somebody that has other experiences, but I've always felt in this space that, I'm como que no soy ni lo suficientemente negrita para estar aquí, ni lo suficientemente blanquita para estar aquí. So there's like a space in between, and a lot of people have come up to me and said, like, thank you for representing that. And I never even thought that. I was just trying to be myself. But the truth is that is a part of myself. So it's been beautiful to experience that. It's also been beautiful with my work to go to other Latin countries and see the diversity and see the African communities, and all the spectrum of that, of what that means. So yeah, I keep learning, as I said, and I keep finding myself, and as well as I want to just be the student, So yeah.
Thank you, Reina. Why don't you bring us home?
Yeah, like Alma said, that was never the goal, to show up as an Afro-Latina artist. It was authenticity. It was, creating what I didn't see and what I wanted to see for myself first and foremost. and not expecting it to resonate the way that it did. But when it did, I could just see how starved we were for the representation that was lacking. And you asked a question a little bit earlier about, you know, the media, and if we are represented, and if we're represented accurately, and we always kind of fit into one stigma, you know, fair skin, dark hair, loud, wild, violent at times, you know, when it comes to the women. And it can be kind of like it just becomes exhausting, you know, and it makes it not exciting to kind of like rally around something that can push culture forward or can represent you, or you'll be proud to show, you know, your friends that don't understand, and just the little nuances that you know, when you have privilege of being the majority, you take that for granted, but it means so much to see yourself and to see like what is possible. And so I think that I always think about my privilege. And so I think I'm happy to show other people like what's possible through that privilege, which is growing up as an Afro-Latina in Miami is a way different experience than growing up as an Afro-Latina in Wisconsin. So I get asked a lot, like, did you feel like not included? Do you feel like you don't get enough opportunities? The reality is that growing up as an Afro-Latina in Miami and maybe even New York, there are people who look like you that are looking out for you, and that kind of understand why it's important. So you're not fighting alone. So you know, I can only imagine Kalma's journey in Germany, and you know, and I know how I felt when I was in Spain, and you kind of see that maybe you wouldn't have as much or maybe I wouldn't have as much energy and as much of a life force to keep fighting if I grew up in an area where I was constantly being beaten down for who I am versus celebrated for who I am. And so that is what I aim to do
Thank you.
through my
Thank
art.
you. Pavel, I would say your art is at least in your podcast is that journey about discovering authenticity, but through the lens of Afro-Latinos. I think one of your latest social media posts was something about like my mom or somebody's mom was like, don't look at this person in the eye, right? And you were like, you have to disregard that advice, right? And when we think about our parents and prior generations, they didn't have this concept. So anyway, that's a long prelude to say, like, in your opinion, not having a lot of portrayals of Afro Latinos in media, how do you feel like that affects the ability for people to be authentic and to be themselves? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I mean, I think representation is really important because it just enables us to think that something is possible. So finding that representation is really important. And it's unfortunate that in entertainment, right, you turn on, you know, any of these news channels that are in Spanish language and it's of a certain look. And I think oftentimes it's not a look of people on this panel. I mean, there are even, let's talk about music, right? Like you see a lot of the most popular reggaeton artists, and a lot of them don't look like people on this panel. Now, are they the most talented? I don't know. I'm not saying I don't vibe with the music. I'll be in there. I'll be in the clubs. I'll be listening to it. I'll be in there. But it's interesting. I don't know. Like, are they the most talented, or are they the people that have just been placed and put in positions to be successful? I don't know. And I do want to give a quick shout out to Reina because I think sometimes it's difficult to find the representation in like human form. But I think art is such a powerful opportunity to create representation and show people what is possible, just like in a painting, in a design. And I think something like that is just as powerful as finding that person. Like there's so many additional ways that we can create representation and show people what is possible. So yeah, representation is important.
Thank you, Pavel. Ivan, maybe I know that you are a very strategic CMO, but also you are a musician, right? You're also an artist. I'd love to hear your thoughts about Afro-Latinidad and how that looks. Pavel brought up a good point. I always see these charts about how like bachateros, when they start out, they are more Afro-Latinos, and then later on it changes. Same thing with reggaeton, right? Like it was Tego and all these people at the beginning, and now it has migrated and it looks slightly different. Whether the music is bad or not, it's still good. It's just I wonder for you as a Afro-Latino musician, what are your thoughts about that?
I think you're speaking about the mainstream effect. We are tastemakers. We lead.
Mm.
We go out and stretch the boundaries, and create things that people don't think were possible, right? Then we galvanize communities around that,
Mm.
and then that scales, and then it's like, oh, okay, wait, let's pull back on those Afro drums, let's pull back on those maracas, and let's get 4 on the floor so we could get the Europeans dancing to this. Sorry, I'm getting a little musically technical there, but
Yeah.
it's what I call the mainstream effect, right? How do you go from the corner, the street, to the stadiums? That's okay, because at the end of the day, we start, we lead, and
Yeah.
it's all about the journey and trying, right? If you don't try, if you don't start, to flex your culture in whatever we're talking about music here, because I think that's inherent to many of us here. It's in our blood, but whatever it is you do, bring that culture into it.
Mm.
Give it a try,
I
right?
love it.
Um,
I love
and
it.
you might come up with something that is truly, truly remarkable. And the other thing is, Alex, this is cool, but let's talk about this on Valentine's Day or on Thanksgiving or on spring break. It's not just 30 days. It's like we are Afro-Latino all day, every day.
Let's do this. Let's do
Let's
this.
experiment and try to celebrate our culture. Let's flip the script and let's go against the current, the mainstream current, and lift up our culture when people least expect it.
I love it. All right, we're about to finish up. So maybe we could do a 30-second clip for the next generation of up and coming Afro Latinos. What advice would you give in order to navigate a world that often demands singular labels, not one or the others? What would be your advice to them coming up, Ivan?
I would just reverse engineer my last answer, and say, flip the script, go against the current, try, right? We're all a work in progress, but the earlier you start, the earlier you'll get to that swagger, that confidence, that self-love.
Love it.
Just try. Just go for it. Embrace who you are. The earlier you do that, the better off you will be, and those around you, and people around you will feel it. You'll give out that energy. Just try.
Thank you. Reina.
I would say that, I think everything that we're doing is a good start. I think my answer is a little bit different, kind of piggybacking off of what Ivan is saying about extending it outside of the month. I think there is also something to be said about the colorism within Afro-Latinidad. Like, even looking at this panel, we're very beautiful people, but there is like a lot of times the darker voices, ooh, my alarm, darker voices get left out of the conversation. And so it's not, when I talk about my privilege as an Afro-Latina, it's also not upon me that like when I collaborate with brands and this and that, they get the best of both worlds without really, really pushing the envelope too much by, you know, propping up a voice that hasn't been so, you know, it's like, it's kind of like with us being in the middle, like the melting pot, and, you know, we have diverse backgrounds, we kind of are able to ease people into the African diaspora. But there's still more work to do, because oftentimes, you know, Amara La Negra, she talked about it a lot on her platform. Like there still is a scale even within Afro-Latinidad that I think we can do more work to kind of like dismantle that.
Calma. Thank you, Reina.
I'd say stay curious. I'd say learn as much as you can about your heritage, about yourself, so you can create your own path and create the things that you want to see in other people.
Thank you.
And I also want to say what I meant about taking other people's spaces was eloquently explained by Reina. So that's kind of what I meant.
Thank you. Oscar.
I would just say it's honestly it's a little bit of a mix of what everybody just said. You know, it's I think that the next generation or whoever's tuned in and listening to this right now, or in the future, just be true to yourself. Do what brings happiness to your heart and put out into the world, unforgivingly. And what I mean by that is whether you think it is good enough or not, just put it out there, regardless of what your background is or whatnot. Any creative avenue that you're taking, put your work out there. It is good enough. You are good enough. And I think that our cultures, our backgrounds, our makeup, what makes us who we are culturally, I think it's a reference point. You know, like that's just really what it is. At the end of the day, like we're all striving to be better versions of ourselves. Our culture is what makes us up, but it's also a reference point. It's something that we can look back on, have conversations with our families, go back to that quote unquote home and discover more about yourself. And when someone says discover more about yourself, it doesn't necessarily mean like yourself, but like your identity, what makes you. You know, there was a lot of very interesting points during this conversation today. And Alex, you actually had mentioned one earlier, like it would be interesting to have this conversation with a panel of African Americans and asking them how they would feel about like being African or being considered African or whatnot. I think for a lot of us, whether we're Latino, African, Asian, European, whatever may have you, going back home and discovering that piece of yourself opens up a whole new world that you didn't even know existed. So to Kalma's point, be curious. That's it.
Thank you, Oscar. All right, why don't you bring us home?
Yeah, I would just say stop caring about what other people think and find comfort in how you self-identify.
All right, guys, it has been a beautiful panel, both visually, if I may say, but also a lot of amazing ideas, a lot of amazing thoughts. And thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for just being yourself. Thank you for being authentic. I had an amazing time. And yeah, look at what Vanessa is saying is the most beautiful panel. I have to agree. So thank you all for bringing your wisdom, your friendships, and you know, some of you I've met decades ago. So I'm so happy to, you know, that I get to reconnect, and those that I'm meeting today, such a pleasure. So with that being said, thank you guys. We're gonna do this again on February 14th, right? That's what Ivan wants. So
Yes.
we'll meet again soon, and